The call came at 6:14 in the morning. Shirley Weston was still in her office chair, the same chair she had been sitting in all night since when her phone lit up. It was her head of communications, Maya. Maya never called this early, not unless something was already burning. Shirley picked up. "It's on the news," Maya said. Her voice was tight and low, the way people talk when they are trying not to shout. "Financial morning report. They're running a headline. It says, Shirley, it says there's an immigrant janitor being questioned in connection with the Meridian data breach." Shirley felt the blood drain from her face. "They have his name," Maya continued. "They have his photo. They have a quote from an unnamed source inside the building. Shirley, the phones are already ringing. 2 clients have emailed asking if their data is safe. The board chair called me 20 minutes ago. He said he needs answers before the market opens." Shirley looked at the monitor in front of her. The honeypot screen she had set up so carefully the night before, the trap she had built, the trap she had been so proud of, it was still open. And the man she had been trying to catch, and the real thief, was probably sitting in his corner office right now drinking his morning coffee, reading the same headline, and smiling. Shirley pressed her hand flat on the desk and closed her eyes. She had been awake for 31 hours. She had planned every single detail. She had thought of everything. She had not thought of Larry, and now Larry Mensa, a man who had never stolen a thing in his life, a man who had come to this country with a degree and a dream and 7 years of night shifts, had his face on national financial news next to the words "data breach suspect." Shirley stood up slowly. Her legs felt heavy. Her chest felt heavier. She walked to her office window and looked out at the city that was just beginning to wake up. Somewhere down there, a single father was reading his own name in a headline, and it was her fault. How had it come to this? 3 months before that morning, Shirley Weston was winning. That is the part no one would understand later, that she was not a desperate woman making a desperate decision. She was sharp. She was careful. She was the kind of person who did not act until she had looked at a problem from every possible angle. And when she finally acted, it was because she was sure. Shirley had built Meridian Analytics from nothing. Not from a little, from nothing. She had come to America from Hong Kong at 22 years old with 2 suitcases, a mathematics degree, and exactly one person who believed in her, herself. She had worked as a data entry clerk, then a junior analyst, then a senior analyst. She had saved money for 4 years before she rented a desk in a shared office space in downtown Chicago and started building something of her own. Meridian Analytics was a data intelligence company. In simple terms, it helped big businesses understand their customers better. It looked at numbers, buying habits, search patterns, spending trends, and turned them into useful information that helped companies make smarter decisions. It was not a flashy business. It did not make headlines the way tech startups did, but it was precise, it was trustworthy, and over 12 years, Shirley had turned it into a $1.4 billion firm with 240 employees and clients in 11 countries. She had earned every single dollar of it, and then, 8 months ago, something started going wrong. It started small. A client called Harwick Financial quietly moved their contract to a company called Vantara Group, a newer, smaller firm that had somehow put together a proposal so close to Meridian's own internal strategy that Shirley had to read it twice just to make sure she wasn't looking at her own document. She assumed it was a coincidence. It stung, but she moved on. Then it happened again. A retail chain called Okafor & Sons, a client Meridian had held for 6 years, left for Vantara. Same story. Vantara's proposal had pricing that matched Meridian's internal models almost exactly. Not similar, exact. Shirley called in her team. She asked questions. She looked at everything. Nobody could explain it. Then Vantara won the Patterson federal contract, a government data project that Meridian had spent 18 months preparing for. The project that was supposed to be the cornerstone of Meridian's next 5 years. Gone. And when Shirley read Vantara's winning submission, she sat very still for a very long time because she recognized the words. She had written most of them herself. That was the moment Shirley Weston stopped assuming and started hunting. because someone inside Meridian, someone with deep access, someone trusted, someone who smiled at her in the hallways, was selling her company's most valuable secrets to the enemy. And she was going to find out who. Shirley did not go to the police, not yet. She did not go to the board either, because the board would panic, and panicking people make noise, and noise warns the person you are trying to catch. So she did the only thing she trusted herself to do. She went quiet. She started watching. For 6 weeks, Shirley moved through the office like nothing was wrong. She smiled at her team in the hallways. She sat through meetings and laughed at the right moments and signed the right papers. But behind her eyes, she was counting. She was measuring. She was building a list of every person who had access to the files that had ended up in Vantara's hands. The list had 11 names on it. 11 people who could have done this. 11 people she had trusted enough to give high-level access. Some of them had been with her for years. One of them had been with her from the very beginning. She hired a private cybersecurity firm, a small, discreet team based in Washington, D.C., and asked them to quietly audit Meridian's internal access logs. She paid for it out of her own account. She told no one inside the building. 3 weeks later, the report came back. And it told her almost everything, but not quite enough. The audit showed a pattern. Over the past 9 months, sensitive files have been accessed and exported in very small pieces at odd hours using what looked like normal authorized activity. Whoever was doing it was careful, methodical. They never took too much at once. They never triggered a single automated alert. They had clearly done this before, or they had done their homework very carefully before starting. What the audit could not confirm a name. The activity had been routed through a shared executive access portal, meaning it could have come from any one of 4 senior people. But it had always happened between 10 at night and 2 in the morning, always on weeknights, always from inside the building. Shirley read the report 3 times. Then she made a decision. If she could not catch the thief using records alone, she would build something better than a record. She would build a door. And she would leave it wide open, and she would wait to see whose hand reached through it. She just did not know yet that the wrong hand would reach through first. Larry Mensa had a rule about his mornings. No matter how tired he was, no matter how long the shift had been or how much his back hurt from pushing the cleaning cart up and down 32 floors, he always made his son breakfast before school. Not cereal from a box, real food. Eggs or oatmeal with honey, or toast with the peanut butter spread all the way to the edges the way 8-year-old Kofi liked it. It was the one thing Larry refused to let the night shift take from him. He had come to America from Ghana 7 years ago. He had left behind a good job, a familiar city, and a mother who cried at the airport and held his face in both her hands and told him to make them proud. But he had arrived in Chicago in February, and the worst possible month to arrive in Chicago if you are from Accra, with a civil engineering degree, a suitcase, and the name of a distant cousin who had promised him a couch to sleep on. The couch lasted 4 months. The engineering job he had planned on never came. Not because he was not qualified, he was more than qualified, but his degree was foreign, his accent was thick, and every firm he applied to found a reason to pass. Too much retraining needed, one told him. We're looking for someone more locally experienced, said another. So Larry took what he could get. A cleaning job. Temporary, he told himself at first, just until something better opened up. That was 7 years ago. 2 years after arriving, his wife left. She had been unhappy since the move, homesick, lonely, tired of waiting for a life that kept being promised and kept not arriving. She went back to Accra and she did not take Kofi with her. Not because she did not love him, but because she said Larry needed a reason to keep going. Kofi was 5 years old at the time. He had his father's eyes and his mother's laugh and absolutely no idea that any of this was hard. Larry worked the night shift at Meridian Analytics 5 days a week. He cleaned 32 floors. He was good at it, invisible, efficient, trusted. On the night that changed everything, he was simply doing his job. He pushed his cart down the corridor of the 32nd floor at 11:47. Most offices were dark, but at the far end of the hall, one door was slightly open and a pale blue light was spilling out across the carpet. Larry slowed down. He pushed the door open gently, and that was when he saw it. The office was dim. Only the monitor was on, casting a cold blue glow across the desk. The chair behind it was turned slightly to the side, and in it sat a woman with her eyes closed. As her breathing was slow and even, she looked like she had fallen asleep while working. Larry recognized her immediately. Everyone in the building knew Shirley Weston. Her photograph was on the wall in the lobby. Her name was on the company letterhead. She was the kind of person that people like Larry existed around but never really spoke to. He almost backed out of the room right there. But then his eyes moved to the monitor and his feet stopped. He was not trying to look, though he genuinely was not. But the screen was angled directly toward the door, and what was on it was the kind of thing that a person with Larry's background could not simply unsee. He had spent 3 years studying data systems as part of his engineering degree. He had spent another 2 years back in Ghana doing infrastructure assessments that involved reading access logs, not so different from the one glowing in front of him right now. And what he saw on that screen looked very, very wrong. Plus, there were file access records and long columns of timestamps and document names and user IDs. Most of them were normal, but buried inside the list, repeating in a pattern that should not have been there, were entries that made his stomach tighten. Large files, sensitive-looking names, downloaded in small pieces spread across multiple sessions, always late at night. It was the kind of pattern that, in engineering terms, looked less like regular use and more like someone carefully emptying a building one brick at a time so no one would notice the walls getting thinner. Larry stood very still. He looked at the sleeping woman in the chair. He looked at the screen. He thought about walking away. He thought about it seriously. He was a janitor. This was a CEO's private office. Nothing about this situation was his business. If he was wrong about what he was seeing, he could lose his job. If he said the wrong thing to the wrong person, he could lose more than that. But he thought about Kofi, about the kind of man he wanted his son to see when he looked at his father, and he reached for his phone to call building security. He did not know that 3 floors below, in a corner office with a city view, a man named Derek Foss had just received a quiet notification on his personal laptop. Someone had accessed the honeypot terminal, and Derek was already smiling. Derek Foss had a very particular kind of smile. It was small, controlled, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes, the kind that looked from a distance like confidence. But up close, if you knew what you were looking for, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like relief. He closed his personal laptop slowly and leaned back in his chair. What the notification had come from a monitoring tool he had installed months ago. A quiet little program that pinged him whenever anyone interacted with certain files on the executive network. Files he had been watching carefully, files that were connected to Shirley's trap in ways she did not know he knew about. Derek had suspected for weeks that Shirley was building something. She had been too calm lately, too steady. Shirley Weston was many things, but she was not a calm person by nature. She was sharp and fast and always slightly ahead of everyone else in the room. So when she suddenly became quiet and easy and unbothered, Derek had paid attention. He had looked closer and he had found the honeypot. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to know that if someone triggered it, the blame would need somewhere to land. And now, according to his notification, someone had been in that office tonight. Someone had been near that screen, and it was not Shirley. Derek picked up his phone and made a call. It was short, 3 sentences. He spoke quietly, the way a person speaks when they have said something many times before and no longer need to think about the words. When he hung up, he poured himself a glass of water, turned off his desk lamp, and went home to sleep. By 5 in the morning, a source inside Meridian's legal department, a source Derek had been cultivating carefully for almost a year, had passed a single line of information to a contact at Financial Morning Report. By 6, the headline was written. By 6:14, Maya was calling Shirley, and Larry Mensa, who had just finished his shift and was on the bus home thinking about what to make Kofi for breakfast, felt his own phone buzz in his jacket pocket. A message from an unknown number. Short, no greeting. It said, "They know it was you. Don't come back to the building." Larry stared at the words for a long time as the bus rolled through the dark streets. His hands had started to shake. Larry read the message 4 more times. Each time the words stayed the same. "They know it was you. Don't come back to the building." He looked around the bus. Nobody was watching him. A woman 2 seats ahead was asleep against the window. An old man near the back was reading a folded newspaper. The driver was staring at the road. Everything looked completely normal. But Larry's heart was beating the way it did when something was very wrong, and his body knew it before his mind caught up. He turned the phone over in his hand. Unknown number, no name, no second message, just those 2 sentences sitting on his screen like a warning carved into stone. He wanted to call someone, but who? He did not have a lawyer. He did not have a union representative. He did not have a single person in his contacts who knew what to do when something like this happened. He had his cousin Marcus, who drove a delivery truck and would absolutely panic. He had his friend Samuel from church, who was kind but whose advice mostly involved prayer and patience. Both good things. Not enough for this. He got off 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way home in the cold, his hands deep in his pockets, his mind running in circles. Old Kofi was still asleep when Larry got in. He stood in the doorway of his son's room for a moment and watched the small rise and fall of the blanket. Kofi slept with one arm hanging off the side of the bed the way he always did. His school bag was already packed and sitting by the door. He had done it himself the night before without being asked. Larry felt something press hard against the inside of his chest. He made the eggs. He made the toast. And he spread the peanut butter all the way to the edges. When Kofi came padding out of his room in his socks, rubbing his eyes, he looked up at his father and smiled that easy, uncomplicated smile that made the whole world feel briefly manageable. "You're home early," Kofi said, climbing onto his chair. "Finished on time today," Larry said. His voice came out steady. He was proud of that. He watched his son eat and did not touch his own plate. Because when Kofi left for school and the apartment went quiet, Larry opened his laptop, typed his own name into a search engine, and found the headline. His photograph was right there. Work ID photo, the one they had taken on his first day at Meridian 3 years ago. He remembered that day. He had worn his best shirt. Underneath the photo in bold black letters, it said, "Immigrant Janitor questioned in Meridian Analytics data breach." Larry sat back slowly in his chair. He had not been questioned. Nobody had questioned him. Nobody had called him, visited him, or spoken a single word to him about any of this. And yet his face was on a financial news website being read by thousands of people, next to a story that made him sound like a criminal. He closed the laptop. He opened it again. He closed it again. Then he put his head in his hands and sat very still in his quiet kitchen while outside the city went about its morning like nothing had happened at all. Shirley had been in crisis mode for exactly 4 hours when her assistant knocked on her office door and told her that 2 more clients had called, not to ask questions, to cancel. She stood at her window with her phone in her hand and a cold cup of coffee on the desk behind her, and she did not say anything for a long moment. Outside, the city was fully awake now. Traffic, people, ordinary Tuesday morning things happening everywhere. None of them knowing that somewhere in a glass tower above them, something that had taken 12 years to build was developing a crack that was spreading faster than anyone could stop it. Maya appeared in the doorway. She had a tablet in her hand and the expression of someone delivering news they wished someone else had been assigned to deliver. 11%. Maya said quietly. Shirley turned around. "What?" "The stock, it dropped 11% in the first 40 minutes of trading." When the Patterson federal office called too, they said they are pausing their review of the renewal contract pending clarification of the situation. Maya paused. Those were their exact words, pending clarification of the situation. Shirley set her phone face down on the desk. She had spent the entire morning trying to reach Meridian's head of legal, a careful man named Gerald Osei, who kept telling her he was handling it and that she should let the process work. But the process, while as far as Shirley could see, was the thing that had caused the problem in the first place. The process had taken a security report about an open terminal and turned it into a press leak and a suspended janitor without anyone stopping to ask the most basic question. Was the janitor actually guilty of anything? Shirley pulled up the building's overnight access log on her computer. She had the clearance to see it. She had always had the clearance. She just had not thought to look until now. She found Larry Mensa's entry immediately. 32nd floor, 11:47 p.m. Duration of access, 9 minutes. 9 minutes. In and out. Standard cleaning rotation. She sat with that number for a moment, then she pulled up Derek Foss's access log, and she felt the air leave her lungs. Because Derek had been in the building that same night, logged into the executive network from his office on the 29th floor at 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after Larry. Shirley stared at the timestamp. 11:52 p.m. She clicked on Derek's log entry and read through it carefully. He had accessed the executive network from his own office terminal. He had opened 3 files. All 3 were inside the same folder as the honeypot documents. He had not opened the honeypot files themselves. He was too careful for that. But he had been there, in the building, on the network, 5 minutes after Larry had been in her office. 5 minutes. Shirley pushed back from her desk and walked to her window again. She needed to think, and she could not think sitting still. She pressed her forehead lightly against the cold glass and looked down at the street below and let her mind move slowly through everything she knew. Larry had entered her office at 11:47. He had stayed 9 minutes, long enough to see the screen, long enough to notice something was wrong. Then he had left and called building security. Yet that call had gone to the overnight security desk, which had filed a report, which had gone to Gerald in legal, which had somehow ended up in the hands of a journalist by 5 in the morning. Derek had been in the building at 11:52, after Larry, after the security report was already filed. She thought about that. If Derek was the source of the leak, if he had a contact inside the legal department, someone who fed him information, someone who owed him something, then he would have known about the security report almost immediately, and he would have understood exactly what it meant. An innocent man had walked into the wrong office at the wrong time and seen the wrong screen, and Derek had taken that accident and turned it into a weapon. He had not framed Larry deliberately from the beginning. He had simply seen an opportunity and moved faster than anyone else. That was Derek. That had always been Derek. The smartest persons in the room, as long as no one was watching him closely enough. Shirley walked back to her desk and opened her drawer. At the bottom, underneath a folder of old contracts, was the private cybersecurity firm's report, the one she had paid for out of her own account 3 weeks ago, the one that had stopped just short of giving her a name. She picked it up and started reading it again, from the beginning. Slower this time. She was on page 4 when her office door opened without a knock. Derek Foss walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the calm, steady expression of a man who had absolutely nothing to hide. "Thought you could use this," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. "It's a tough morning, but we'll get through it." He sat down across from her and crossed one leg over the other and looked at her with the kind of warm concern that, until about 40 minutes ago, she had always believed was real. Shirley looked at the coffee, then she looked at him. She smiled. "Thank you, Derek," she said. "Close the door, will you? I want to talk through a few things with you." Derek smiled back and reached behind him for the door. He did not notice that Shirley's hand had moved quietly to her keyboard, or that she had just opened a recording application on her computer. Derek talked for 22 minutes. He did not know he was being recorded. Well, he thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought he was managing Shirley the way he had been managing her for months. Carefully, patiently, feeding her just enough to keep her looking in the wrong direction. He said Larry was probably confused. He said the legal team had acted appropriately. He said these things happen in crisis situations, and the most important thing now was protecting the company's reputation. And then Shirley slid the cybersecurity report across the desk and pointed to page 4. Derek's smile did not disappear all at once. It faded slowly, the way light fades at the end of the day, sus. You do not notice the exact moment it is gone until suddenly the room is dark. "I've been looking at the access patterns again," Shirley said quietly, "and I've been looking at yours." Derek said nothing. "You were in the building at 11:52. You have a contact in legal. And you have been routing file exports through the shared executive portal in pieces small enough to avoid every single automated alert we have." She paused. "For 9 months, Derek." The room was very still. "You built this company with me," Shirley said. Her voice did not shake. She had decided it would not shake. You sat in every meeting. You knew every client. You knew exactly what those files were worth. She looked at him steadily. Why? Derek looked at the window, then at his hands, and then, finally, at her. He did not answer, but his silence answered everything. Federal investigators arrived at Meridian's offices 4 days later. They had the recording, they had the access logs. They had 9 months of evidence that Derek Foss had been selling Meridian's client intelligence to Vantara Group for just under $2 million routed through a private consulting company registered in his sister's name. He was arrested on 6 counts of theft of trade secrets and wire fraud. But he did not say a word as they walked him out. Larry Mensa was reinstated the following Monday with full back pay and a written apology from the board. But the thing that mattered most to Larry did not come from the board. It came on a Wednesday afternoon when his phone rang and the voice on the other end said, "Larry, this is Shirley Weston. I need to tell you something and I need to say it directly. What happened to you was my fault. You did nothing wrong. You saw something that was wrong and you reported it the only way you knew how. And the trap I built, without thinking about who else could walk into it, put your name in a headline it had no business being in. I am sorry." Larry sat at his kitchen table and listened. He did not say it was fine, because it had not been fine. His son had come home from school one day and asked why a boy in his class had said his father was a thief. That was not fine. That would take time to be fine. But he said, "I hear you." And Shirley said, "There's something else I want to ask you, but only if you're open to hearing it." She told him about the new internal integrity division she was building. A small team, people who understood systems not just from the top down but from every level. People whose judgment had already been tested when no one was watching. She asked if he would consider being part of it. Larry looked around his small kitchen, at the peanut butter on the counter, and at Kofi's drawing stuck to the fridge with a magnet, a picture of a man in a hard hat standing next to a tall building labeled Daddy in unsteady letters. He thought about 7 years of being told he was not quite enough, not quite local enough, not quite credentialed enough, not quite the right kind of person for the right kind of room. He thought about the night he had stood in a dim office with a mop in his hand and chosen not to look away from something wrong. But he thought about this kind of man he wanted Kofi to see when he looked at his father. "Tell me more about the role," Larry said, and for the first time in a very long time, the future felt like something he was walking toward rather than something he was waiting on. Outside, the city hummed along as it always did, ordinary and indifferent and full of people carrying quiet, heavy things. But in a small kitchen on the 4th floor of a building on West Adams Street, and a single father sat a little straighter in his chair and let himself believe that the hard part was finally behind him.